For Creamer Media's Polity, I am Shannon Durehove. Entrepreneur and recovered drug addict Marco Broccardo joins me to discuss his autobiography, Rocks, One Man's Climb from Drugs to Dreams. You begin your story by stating that society makes excuses for drug addicts and substance abusers. Why do you say this, and what should society be doing to overcome the scourge of drugs and addiction?
I think the reason why I say that, I think, the societal way or the normal way that people look at addiction nowadays is that addiction's a disease, and that it's either hereditary or it's in your genes, or once you've become an addict, then you really have no hope of recovery. So it's a scapegoat of sorts, because once I was told, I wrote about it in the book, that I was an addict and I was suffering from the disease of addiction, I realized that, well, I'm sick. I don't have a choice in this whole matter. This is who I am. This is how I've been made up. If anything, it's my parents and my grandparents' problem and their fault, and so I'm not going to do anything about it. And I say that now because people look at addicts as people that are sick, so the accountability and the power of their choice is sort of taken away from it. Whereas I really believe that addiction's a choice. It's not a disease. It's something that we choose to do. I used to actively wake up every day and decide to go buy drugs. I didn't do it. I didn't miraculously appear in my pockets. It was something that I actually had to go out and do. So for me, I think society needs to hold people accountable to the choices that they make. I think that we are moving into a society where, there's no accountability anymore for anything, and it's not just the addicts. So many things now are just, regarded as okay, and experimentation, and, let them be kids. And I think we need to really take a firm stand against it and realize that the choices that we make, even the small choices, can have detrimental impacts on the rest of your life.
Both your mother and father were completely unaware of your drug use, with both expressing regret at not being more involved in your upbringing and being more aware of drugs and the signs of drug abuse. What advice would you offer to parents who find themselves in similar situations?
I think the first thing to sort of maybe clarify is that my parents, whilst they regret the decisions that they'd made, I don't think they could have ever done anything different. The choices were my own. So I had a very good upbringing. My parents were good parents. I didn't come from a broken home. And, I think they were naive to the fact that I was on drugs. And I think it was a choice that they'd made. I think, or I can imagine that no parent wants to willfully think that their child is becoming a degenerate and a drug addict. So denial is a very powerful thing. And I think for my parents, especially my mom, it was a big thing. My mom was in denial for many years. Even though the outward signs were there, she just wouldn't believe it. But I think parents should never ever take responsibility for their kids. They shouldn't feel guilty about what their kids have done, and they mustn't feel ashamed of the decisions that their children have made. So it's never their fault. My addiction was my fault completely. My advice to parents is that they need to just be more aware. They need to look out for the telltale signs. They need to look for, lethargy, or for kids that are no longer interested in sports, or, just mood changes and mood swings, and if they're not keeping themselves tidy and, cleanliness has gone out the window. They need to look for those things and then face them head on there and then. Because often we let those things creep under the rug and we let them go and before you know it, it's blown up into something quite big. So my advice is just keep your eyes open. Don't ever think that it can never happen to your child, because it can. It can happen to your child for sure. No one is above becoming addicted. If they want to do it, they'll do it. Whether you come from a good home, a bad home, you're rich, you're poor, you're black, you're white, doesn't really matter. Everyone's susceptible to it. It depends on their decisions. And if it is your child, then deal with it there and then. Because the longer you leave it and the longer you stay in denial, the worse the problem will become.
Your sister Laura places much of the blame for your drug addiction on herself. What would you say to Laura or other family members of drug addicts who are struggling with the guilt of a family member's addictions?
So again, I think that, my sister, as much as, in the book, I talk about it, we got involved, or I got involved with drugs and taking drugs with her around. The choice to use was my own, so whether it was her or somebody else, it wouldn't have made a difference. And the same goes for making the right decisions. There's something that you have to want to do. Nobody can force you to make the right choice. So I think that whilst she realistically would look at herself and think, I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I should have said something, or I shouldn't have let him do this, the reality is it was my choice. And I've said that to her. There's nothing that she could have done that I think would have changed my mind. And the responsibility is squarely on my shoulders.
What is the most profound lesson you've learned over your lifetime?
Sure. I think that for me, my whole life now is centered around the message of hope, and that there is hope, there's always hope. I mean, as an addict, and especially deep into your addiction, you're a pretty hopeless person. Life is very dark, and there doesn't seem like there's ever a happy ending. And for me, realizing and coming to the moment in my life where I realized that I was set free from addiction and that I was clean, and by the grace of God, He made me who I am today, and my faith has played a critical role in that. Without it, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. But for me, it's about this message of hope, is that, as dark as it seems now, there's always hope. It's never just over, it's never just, this is the end. What the challenge though is that you have to keep persevering. So if you continue fighting, then you'll get through it. And that's what all our mountain climbs and our desert walks are all about. It's about showing people that people like me, who came from really hectic circumstances in terms of my addiction, can turn their lives around and do something amazing. Then anybody can do it. I'm not special, I'm no different from anyone else. And if I can do it, there's got to be hope that somebody else can do it.
Especially when it's coming off heroin.
Correct. Well, heroin and crack, it was it was a lot of stuff. And I think for me it was just, I'd been to many rehabs, but the pivotal moment in changing me was my family and them instituting tough love, finally. But then also, going to rehab where, it was faith-based, and, I got a chance to experience more than just the traditional sort of secular rehabilitation methods. And that, it's kept me clean for 16 years.
You have 2 sons and a newborn baby daughter. What will you tell them about your past and about drugs? How will you teach them about the dangers of drugs, but still allow them to make their own choices?
So, my oldest son, who is now 8, and the middle child is now 6, they are both quite aware. I mean, there was a short little film that was done, and part of it was my life story, and in that there's a scene where I'm committing suicide in the bathtub. And my older boy obviously understood it and realized what I was doing, and he said to me, Dad, why were you doing that, And I've always maintained that I would always tell my children the truth, about my life. Obviously, when they're younger, it's a bit more sanitized in terms of the actual experiences. But for them to understand that nobody is excused from bad behavior. We all have the capacity to behave in ways that are completely out of the norm. So my approach to them as they grow older is to be completely honest about who I am, where I've come from, the things that I did. I don't have to embellish the stories, but to say to them, this is where I went wrong. These are the choices that I made. And you mentioned them making their choices. For us, it's about showing them that there's consequences for their actions. Teaching them now already from a young age that if you do this, then that's going to happen. Their choices are their own. I can't make them for them. But just trying to highlight to them that if you do make those choices, then you need to understand that there's a heavy price to pay. And being completely honest with them in that process, and being able to stand by whatever the consequences are, so, and that's a challenge, because a lot of the times we put consequences in place for our children, but then, they'll push their boundaries, and we never actually implement the consequences, whether it's time out or whatever it is. And for me, it's trying to get that ingrained in their minds now, that the small choices that they make today eventually lead up to something really important. I learned quite a valuable lesson in the desert. Well, the message was reinforced, was that this journey across the desert, when we walked and we walked 1,208 kilometers across the Arabian desert to set this world record, that if you look at the journey in its entirety, it seems almost insurmountable and very long. But fundamentally, that journey was made up with tiny little steps, and choice is the same. You can get to making a humongously bad decision, but leading up to that big decision was tiny little small decisions that you made. So for me, it's about teaching them the power of choice, and how even the smallest choices are so important, because we can corrupt our own sense of goodwill. If we continually lie to ourselves, lie to other people, and do things that are wrong, then our mind no longer understands that this is bad and that's good. We just automatically move towards making bad decisions. So for now, that's what we're trying to teach our kids. But there's no guarantees, our children will make their own decisions.
The royalties from the sales of your book will be given to the non-profit organization Mountain Heights, which you run together with your wife, Catherine. Tell us about this and what you hope to achieve in the future.
So Mountain Heights was set up after my recovery, and once I'd sort of sorted my life out, and I realized that addiction, or the plague of addiction, is something that is sweeping through this country of ours and the world in general, and that there's a lot of hopeless people out there. And if I could get to the point where I felt completely recovered and felt set free from it, then other people should feel the same. So Mountain Heights was set up And within the Mountain Heights setup are 3 different initiatives. One is we're eventually going to build a self-sustaining rehab center that will be available to all people, whether you're rich or poor, you have money, you don't have money. But in the meantime, there's counseling, treatment, sponsoring of addicts to go to treatment centers. So we currently sponsor people to go to facilities completely paid for. And then also the mountains and the desert. So it's about these physical representations of the mountains in our lives and how we can conquer them. And again, we're not super athletes. If I could set a world record, anyone can. It's about taking a normal bunch of people that have beaten addiction or any problems in their lives really, and taking them and putting them against these big mountains or these big challenges, and showing people that if they can do it, they can also. So Mountain Heights, that's what it's all about. It's all about bringing hope to those that are addicted, but bringing hope to people that have lost hope. So whatever funds we raise through the sale of the book or through talks or whatever we do goes into that initiative with the hope of sponsoring people, working with families, eventually building a rehab, and continuing to bring hope through the message of hope through our initiatives and our different expeditions.
That was entrepreneur and recovered drug addict Marco Broccardo discussing his autobiography, Rocks, One Man's Climb from Drugs to Dreams.